Hello and welcome, my name is Meepolis, they, he, she, and today's pick is Dark Rain, a New Orleans story by Matt Johnson and Simone Gane, published by Vertigo in 2010. My second Matt Johnson read and review, I picked this book up for my Black Comics TBR and Vertigo TBR. Content notes for fat phobia, guns, character death, pregnancy, mercenaries, extreme flooding, water scarcity, corpses, dead kids, and pets. Moving on to the creative team, as I already mentioned, this is my second Matt Johnson read. To hear their full biography, check out my review of their earlier graphic novel, INCOGNEGRO, also published by Vertigo in 2008. Simone Gane, on the other hand, is brand spanking new to this channel and my reading in general. An illustrator in Bristol, Gane has also illustrated comics entitled Sunburn and Paris, as well as lots of commission work posted over on good old Blogspot. Keywords that came to mind reading this volume: parole, family, community, mercenaries, heist, abandonment, segregation, disaster, and death. The summary over on Goodreads is, quote, graphic novel thriller set in the days after Hurricane Katrina. Two small-time ex-cons with big dreams get the idea that this would be the perfect time to rob a bank. Catch is, the bank is in New Orleans, and they're on parole in Houston. Now, as every sane person tries to get out of the big easy, Emmit and Dabny will do whatever it takes to get in. As they journey through the tide of human suffering, Dabny wants to help, and Emmit sees only the money. But a rogue commander of the ruthless security force, Dark Rain, has his sights set on taking down the same bank. If Emmit and Dabny don't outrace him, their last hope for a second chance could be washed away in the floodwaters, along with their lives. End quote. Looking at the writing, I think perhaps the most important thing to highlight about Dark Rain is that it is very genre, and is a heist adventure story, not a literary novel sort of story. For something more along the lines of the latter, you might be more interested in A.D. New Orleans After the Deluge by Josh Neufeld, which I reviewed all the way back in 2019. That said, if you've been watching Literally Graphic for any amount of time, I hope I've made it clear that genre fiction is awesome. And I think there are a number of key things that Johnson is saying through this particular kind of story that I really appreciated. Most central to the story, I think, was a real exploration of key buzzwords such as looting and an examination of who is good and who is bad. Following the story, we see a lot of stigmatized people, poor, black, and or criminalized by the so-called justice system, being caring, limited, selfish, selfless, noble, and many other things that push back against the one-note dog-eat-dog sort of narrative that often gets centered in post-apocalyptic stories. Digging just beneath the narrative that says civilians should be shot for looting, a story that persists to this day. Every time there's a disaster where we see people trapped and abandoned trying to survive, we see a world that I find to be much more genuine. A world of violence orchestrated to keep people trapped, and the violence that keeps resources on the shelves of capitalism rather than in the hands of the people who need it. Scrolling through the small number of negative reviews I could find for this title, people felt like the pacing was off, which is fair, and or that it was too political, which is less fair. Life is political. LOL. Moving on to the artwork, it wasn't super distinct, which is fine and did not detract from its intrinsic goodness, and there was a nice use of limited color scheme. Moving along to different kinds of people we find represented in the story, as we do in each review. Race was obviously pretty central to the story alongside class. Das Kapital it is not, but it does illuminate a bit on the restrictions on a person's life when they are poor and caught up in the correctional system. A striking example is why people can't evacuate in the face of a hurricane. Disability versus ability did come up a bit, largely in the character of Emmit's cousin Speedy, who faces a lot of derogatory/fatphobic comments about his body and does run into some limits as to his own abilities. Kind of a mixed bag to my mind, because while we do see him as capable of important plot-needed things and generally deeply respected by Emmit, it felt like I was supposed to find that a bit too surprising. Obviously, I read plenty of books where bad people do bad things, but it felt like this was laid on thick enough to make it that much more difficult for people who have experienced this sort of discrimination to enjoy it. Similarly, I was actually a bit relieved for the eye-rolling heterosexual/cis one-notedness of the story, because in INCOGNEGRO, inclusion of more diverse characters did not go well, in my humble opinion. But yeah, Our main hero does get the girl in the end. Wrapping things up, a book with lots of pluses and a smattering of minuses. I guess I would say it's a 3-star read. Pick it up if it sounds interesting, but certainly not a must read. Bye y'all, keep reading, and stand with striking workers. And Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, an Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.